Flora stood outside the Duke's study with her hands clasped tightly before her. The corridor stretched endlessly beneath crystal chandeliers, yet she felt trapped in a space far smaller than the grand estate surrounding her. 3 years ago, she had entered Blackwood Manor as a bride. Today, as she stared at the dark oak doors before her, she felt more like a stranger than ever. The servant who had delivered the summons bowed and retreated without a word. Flora remained still for a moment, gathering what little courage she possessed. Duke Adrian Blackwood never called for her unless necessity demanded it. Their marriage had long ago settled into a cold routine governed by duty rather than affection. Taking a slow breath, she pushed open the door. The study was quiet except for the crackling fire. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books and documents that reflected the Duke's disciplined nature. Behind a large desk sat Adrian himself. At 25, he possessed the sort of presence that commanded attention without effort. His dark hair was neatly combed, his posture perfectly straight, and his expression unreadable. Many women across the kingdom admired his handsome features. Flora had once been one of them. Now she knew beauty meant little when warmth was absent. He did not look up when she entered. "You asked to see me, Your Grace," she said softly. A brief silence followed. Then Adrian reached for a document resting on his desk and pushed it forward. "Take the divorce papers." Flora blinked. For a second she wondered if she had misheard him. The words echoed through her mind. Divorce papers. Her gaze slowly dropped to the document. There it was. Her name. His signature. An empty space waiting for hers. "The carriage is waiting," Adrian continued. "You'll leave immediately after signing." His voice carried the same emotion one might use to discuss the weather. Nothing more. Nothing less. Flora stared at the paper as though it might suddenly transform into something else. 3 years. 3 years of trying. 3 years of hopping. 3 years of convincing herself that patience would eventually be rewarded. And now it had ended with a few sentences. Strangely, she felt no shock. Perhaps because part of her had always expected this day. Their marriage had never been a love match. The daughter of a struggling noble family and the most powerful duke in the kingdom did not marry for romance. She remembered arriving at Blackwood Manor at 19, carrying nervous dreams inside her heart. Adrian had been distant from the beginning, polite, respectful, untouchable. He never insulted her. He never raised his voice. Yet he never truly welcomed her either. The memory stung. She remembered attending banquets alone while her husband disappeared into matters of state. She remembered whispering behind jeweled fans. Poor Flora. The Duke doesn't even look at her. She remembered countless dinners where a second plate remained untouched because Adrian never came home. Worst of all were the rumors. The kingdom loved gossip. Again and again she heard stories about a mysterious woman who supposedly held the Duke's heart. No one knew her name, but everyone seemed convinced she existed. Flora had spent years competing with a phantom, a rival she could neither see nor defeat. At first she fought back. Then she endured. Eventually she simply stopped asking questions. Because every attempt to bridge the distance between them ended the same way. With silence. Across the desk Adrian remained motionless. His expression gave away nothing. As if ending a marriage required no effort at all. Flora's chest tightened. She had promised herself she would leave with dignity if this day ever came. No tears. No pleading. No humiliation. Yet the sight of the prepared signature line shattered those intentions. He had already decided everything. The carriage. The papers. The arrangements. There had never been room for her opinion. A sudden ache rose in her throat. Before she could stop herself, tears slipped down her cheeks. One landed upon the document. Then another. The droplets stained the paper. For the first time, Adrian looked up. His eyes met hers. Something flickered across his face. Surprise. Perhaps even pain. But it vanished so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. Flora lowered her gaze. After everything, she whispered, struggling to steady her voice, was I truly that easy to throw away? The question lingered between them. Adrian's hand tightened around the edge of his desk. The movement was subtle. Most people would not have noticed. Flora did. For a heartbeat she thought he might answer. Thought he might explain. Thought he might finally tell her why their marriage had failed. Instead, silence returned. The familiar silence. The same silence that had filled every year of their life together. Her heart broke a little more. She wiped her tears and reached for the pen. The room felt strangely distant as she signed her name. Flora Blackwood. Soon even that name would no longer belong to her. When she finished, she set the pen down carefully. Adrian's gaze never left her. Yet he still said nothing. Not stay. Not forgive me. Not goodbye. Nothing. Flora rose from her chair. The final thread connecting them seemed to snap. I hope you find whatever it is you've been searching for, Your Grace, she said quietly. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. She refused to look back. If she did, she feared she might shatter completely. Outside, servants stood waiting near the grand entrance. Several lowered their eyes as she approached, others looked openly distressed. Flora realized they knew. Word had already spread. One elderly maid pressed a handkerchief into her hands. Take care of yourself, my lady, she whispered. The kindness nearly brought fresh tears. Flora managed a grateful smile before climbing into the waiting carriage. The driver snapped the reins. The estate slowly began to disappear behind her. From the highest window of the manor, a solitary figure watched the carriage depart. Adrian stood perfectly still. Only his clenched fists betrayed the storm beneath his calm exterior. Minutes later, a trusted messenger entered the study carrying a sealed report marked with urgent insignia. Adrian broke the seal and scanned the contents. His face lost all color. A new message had arrived from his network of informants. Someone had been searching for Flora again. Someone dangerous. Someone who should have abandoned the hunt years ago. The carriage carrying his former wife had barely left the estate. And already the shadows were moving. The coastal town have welcomed Flora without questions. That alone felt like a gift. No one here knew she had once been a duchess. No one whispered behind jeweled fans or measured her worth according to the attention of a powerful husband. To the townspeople, she was simply a young woman renting a modest cottage near the harbor. For the first few days, Flora struggled with the silence. Not the painful silence she had known inside Blackwood Manor, where every unanswered question felt like a wound. This silence was different. It belonged to the sea rolling against the shore and the gulls circling above the fishing boats. It was peaceful. Yet peace felt unfamiliar. Each morning she woke expecting disappointment. Each evening she waited for loneliness to return. Instead, the days passed gently. The cottage was small but comfortable. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Wildflowers grew beside the path leading to the front door. The scent of salt carried through the air whenever she opened the shutters. For the first time in years, she could make choices for herself. The realization was both freeing and frightening. One afternoon, she rented an empty storefront near the town square. The building had once belonged to a retired merchant. Its walls needed paint and its shelves were dusty, but Flora immediately saw potential. Flowers had always been her refuge. When court gossip became unbearable, she escaped to the manor gardens. When loneliness threatened to consume her, she spent hours arranging bouquets. Flowers required patience. They bloomed in their own time. Unlike people, they never hid their nature. Within weeks, the abandoned shop transformed into something beautiful. Colorful arrangements filled the windows. Fresh roses, lilies, daisies, and lavender lined the shelves. The townspeople quickly noticed. Customers arrived every day. Some purchased flowers for celebrations. Others simply enjoyed talking to the kind young owner. Flora found herself smiling more often. The change surprised her. She had forgotten what happiness felt like when it wasn't dependent on someone else's approval. Still, certain habits remained. At night, after closing the shop, she would sit beside the window with a cup of tea and stare at the moonlit sea. Those quiet moments always led her thoughts back to Adrian. She hated that they did. She hated that despite everything, her heart still belonged to him. The divorce papers had ended their marriage. They had not ended her feelings. Inside a small wooden box hidden beneath her bed rested 3 possessions she could not bring herself to discard. Her wedding ring, a portrait painted shortly after their marriage, and a faded ribbon from her bridal bouquet. She told herself she kept them only because they represented an important chapter of her life. Deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't ready to let go. Miles away in the capital, Adrian Blackwood stood inside his study surrounded by documents. Unlike Flora, he had found no peace after the divorce. The manor felt emptier than ever. The dining hall echoed. The gardens seemed lifeless. Even the servants moved cautiously around him. For years, he had convinced himself that distance was necessary. Now he questioned every decision he had made. The urgent report from his informants remained spread across his desk. Several names had appeared repeatedly during his investigation. One name appeared more often than the others. Lady Seraphine, his most trusted advisor, the woman who had managed portions of his political affairs for years. The evidence disturbed him. Financial records, secret correspondence, witness statements. Individually, they seemed harmless. Together, they painted a dangerous picture. Adrian spent days verifying every detail. The deeper he dug, the darker the truth became. Late one evening, his captain of intelligence entered the study carrying another collection of reports. "You should see this, Your Grace." Adrian accepted the documents. His expression hardened as he read. Several attacks against Flora over the past 3 years had been linked to individuals connected with Seraphine. Assassins, informants, mercenaries. The pattern was impossible to ignore. A cold realization settled over him. Someone had not merely threatened Flora. Someone had systematically hunted her. And the person responsible had been standing beside him all along. "What is her motive?" Adrian asked. The captain hesitated. "We believe it concerns Lady Flora's bloodline." Adrian looked up sharply. "Explain." The captain placed another document on the desk. Years earlier, a branch of the royal family had vanished from official records following a succession dispute. Recent investigations revealed a surviving descendant. Flora. Her family had never known the significance of their ancestry. Neither had she. Yet legally, she possessed a distant claim connected to the crown. A claim powerful enough to attract ambitious enemies. Adrian's pulse quickened. Everything suddenly made sense. The attacks, the rumors, the manipulation. Someone wanted control over Flora. Or her removal. Seraphine had likely spread stories about a secret lover to deepen the divide between husband and wife. She had encouraged misunderstandings, fed false information to both sides. And when Adrian finally divorced Flora, she achieved something even more valuable. Flora lost the protection of the Blackwood name. For the first time in years, she stood exposed. Adrian rose abruptly from his chair. Regret struck him with brutal force. He had believed he was protecting her by creating emotional distance. Instead, he had handed his enemies exactly what they wanted. Every lonely dinner, every unanswered question, every tear she had hidden. The memories returned with painful clarity. Especially her final words. "After everything, was I truly that easy to throw away?" No battlefield wound had ever cut as deeply. He closed his eyes briefly. Then he made a decision. "Prepare my horse," he ordered. The captain blinked. "Your Grace, I'm leaving tonight. The capital still requires." "The capital can wait." His voice left no room for argument. Flora's safety mattered more than politics. More than titles. More than appearances. Perhaps he should have realized that years ago. As servants rushed to obey, Adrian gathered the reports and secured them inside a leather satchel. For the first time, he stopped hiding behind duty. If Flora was in danger, he would protect her openly. If she hated him, he would accept it. If she never forgave him, he would endure it. But he would not abandon her again. Hours later, beneath the cover of darkness, he rode toward the coast. Far away, Flora locked the door to her flower shop and began walking home. The streets were quiet. The sea breeze was cool against her skin. She never noticed the two figures watching from the shadows across the square. Their eyes followed her every step. And when she disappeared around the corner, one of them smiled. The hunt had finally found its target. The attack came 3 nights later. Flora had just finished arranging fresh lavender in a ceramic vase when she heard glass shatter. The sound froze her in place. A second crash followed immediately. Then footsteps. heavy, purposeful, moving through the front of the flower shop. Her pulse spiked. The streets of were usually peaceful. Drunken arguments occasionally disturbed the harbor district, but this felt different. This felt deliberate. Flora carefully stepped away from the counter and listened. The footsteps. More than one person. A chill raced down her spine. Before she could reach the back door, a figure emerged from the darkness near the entrance. The man wore dark clothing and carried a drawn blade. Another appeared behind him. Then a third. Fear tightened around her chest. "Who are you?" she demanded. None of them answered. The silence told her everything she needed to know. They hadn't come to rob her. They had come for her. Flora backed away. The men advanced. One reached for a lantern hanging near the doorway and deliberately threw it onto a shelf filled with dried flowers. Flames erupted instantly. Within seconds, fire climbed the walls. Smoke began filling the room. Panic surged through her. The attackers were eliminating witnesses. They intended to make her death appear accidental. The nearest assassin lunged. Flora grabbed a metal watering can and swung it with all her strength. The blow struck his shoulder, staggering him briefly. She ran. A hand caught her arm. She cried out and struggled desperately. The grip tightened, then suddenly released. A sword flashed through the smoky air. The attacker collapsed. For one stunned moment, Flora couldn't understand what had happened. Then she saw him. Adrian. His dark coat was covered in dust from travel. Rainwater dripped from his shoulders. A drawn sword gleamed in his hand. His expression was colder than she had ever seen. Not toward her, toward the men surrounding them. The assassins hesitated. Adrian stepped forward. "Touch her again," he said quietly, "and none of you leave alive." The threat carried absolute certainty. The battle exploded. Steel clashed. Flames crackled. Smoke thickened around them. Adrian moved with terrifying precision. Years of military training transformed every motion into lethal efficiency. One attacker fell. Then another. A third rushed him from behind. Adrian turned and struck before the blade could connect. Flora had seen him as a duke, as a husband, as a distant stranger. She had never seen him as a warrior. Now she understood why enemies feared the Iron Duke. Yet there were too many opponents. More men entered through the shattered doorway. One managed to slash Adrian's arm. Another cut across his shoulder. Blood stained his sleeve. Still he continued fighting. Still he placed himself between Flora and danger. At last the surviving attackers retreated into the night. The shop stood half consumed by flames. Adrian lowered his sword. His breathing became uneven. Only then did Flora notice how pale he looked. "Adrian." He took a single step toward her, then collapsed. The sword slipped from his hand. Flora reached him before he hit the floor. "Adrian." He didn't respond. Blood spread rapidly across his clothing. For a moment, terror overwhelmed everything else. The divorce, the misunderstandings, the hurt, none of it mattered. All she could think was that he might die. And she wasn't ready to lose him. Not like this. The townspeople arrived moments later and helped carry Adrian to her cottage while others fought the fire. A physician worked through the night treating his injuries. By dawn, the immediate danger had passed. Exhausted, Flora sat beside the bed. The sight unsettled her. Adrian looked strangely vulnerable without his usual composure. His face seemed younger somehow. Less guarded, more human. When he finally opened his eyes late the following afternoon, relief washed through her so strongly that she nearly cried. "You're awake." Adrian studied her for a moment. "You weren't hurt." The question surprised her. That was his first concern. Not his injuries. Not the attack. No. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Only then did he seem willing to rest. The following days forced them into an uncomfortable closeness. Adrian's injuries prevented travel. Flora refused to leave him unattended. The cottage became their shared refuge. At first, conversations remained cautious. Years of distance could not disappear overnight. Yet small moments gradually weakened the walls between them. Flora noticed he remembered details she had never mentioned twice. He knew exactly how she prepared her tea. He remembered her favorite books. He recognized every flower growing near the cottage. One afternoon she caught him staring at a collection of pressed flowers she kept inside a journal. "You still preserve them," he observed. She frowned. "How do you know I used to do that?" A faint shadow of a smile appeared. "You showed me once." The answer stunned her. She barely remembered the occasion herself. Another discovery followed. While changing the bandages on his shoulder, Flora found a faded ribbon tucked inside a pocket of his travel coat. Her breath caught. It was the ribbon from her wedding bouquet. The same color. The same embroidery. She looked up slowly. "You kept this?" Adrian remained silent. The silence no longer felt indifferent. It felt vulnerable. Days later, during a stormy evening, rain tapped softly against the cottage windows. The sea roared beyond the cliffs. The atmosphere felt intimate in a way neither could ignore. Flora finally asked the question haunting her heart. "If you loved me, why didn't you tell me?" Adrian's expression tightened. For a long moment he stared into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded rough. "Because I thought protecting you was enough." Flora felt tears gathering. "Do you know what those years felt like?" His eyes met hers. Pain reflected there. Real pain. Not the cold indifference she once believed defined him. "I know now." She shook her head. "No, you don't." Her voice trembled. "I would have faced every danger with you. Instead, you shut me out. You protected my life while breaking my heart." The truth hung between them. Adrian accepted it without argument. Because he knew she was right. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly. The confession shocked her. Adrian Blackwood never admitted weakness. "I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." Flora stared at him. For the first time she understood. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to see the man behind the armor. Enough to see his regret. Enough to see the love hidden beneath years of silence. The distance between them disappeared. She stepped closer. Adrian lifted a hand and gently touched her cheek. The gesture carried more tenderness than all their years of marriage combined. Then he kissed her. Slowly, carefully, as though afraid she might vanish. Years of loneliness shattered. Years of misunderstanding dissolved. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. For the first time since their wedding, they truly belonged to each other. Outside, the storm gradually faded. Inside, hope returned. Yet hundreds of miles away, Lady Seraphine received news of the failed assassination. Her expression darkened. The Duke had interfered. Again, she walked toward a waiting carriage and issued a single order. Prepare the final phase. If Flora could not be killed quietly, she would be taken by force. And this time, Seraphine intended to finish what she had started. For 2 precious weeks, Flora allowed herself to believe the worst was behind them. The cottage overlooking the sea became a place of healing. Adrian's wounds steadily improved. Their conversations grew easier. The distance that had once defined their marriage seemed to disappear with each passing day. They shared meals together, walked along the shoreline, spoke openly about fears neither had ever voiced before. For the first time since their wedding, they behaved like a husband and wife. Not bound by duty, bound by choice. That fragile happiness ended at dawn. Flora awoke to unfamiliar voices outside the cottage. Before she could fully understand what was happening, the front door burst open. Armed men flooded the room. Adrian immediately reached for his sword. But he was still recovering. A blow struck the back of his head before he could defend himself. "Adrian!" Flora rushed toward him. Strong hands seized her arms. She fought desperately. The struggle accomplished nothing. Within moments she was dragged outside. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed the scene was Adrian trying to rise despite his injuries. Trying to reach her. Trying to stop them. Hours later, Flora found herself imprisoned inside an abandoned fortress, hidden among rocky cliffs far from the coast. The walls were ancient, the corridors cold, every exit heavily guarded. A familiar woman entered her cell before sunset. Lady Seraphine, elegant as always, composed as always, dangerous as ever. Flora rose slowly. So it was you. Seraphine smiled faintly. You're more perceptive than your husband believed. My husband never underestimated me. The response earned a brief flicker of irritation. Seraphine approached the window. For years you stood between me and everything I wanted. Flora folded her arms. I've never even met you. Exactly. Bitterness sharpened Seraphine's voice. You possessed influence without understanding it, power without earning it. Flora remained silent. Seraphine continued. Your bloodline grants you a legitimate connection to the royal succession. With the proper support, your claim could alter the balance of the kingdom. The revelation no longer shocked Flora. Adrian had already explained much of the truth. What does that have to do with me? Everything. Seraphine turned. I spent years creating alliances, years shaping political loyalties, then I discovered you existed. The woman's eyes hardened. You became an obstacle. Flora finally understood. This had never been personal. It had been ambition. The most dangerous motive of all. You killed people for a crown. Seraphine's expression remained calm. I sacrificed what was necessary. Flora shook her head. No, you destroyed lives because you believed power mattered more than humanity. For the first time, Seraphine's smile vanished. Without another word, she left. The cell door slammed shut. Meanwhile, Adrian awakened with fury burning through every part of him. The moment he learned Flora had been taken, he abandoned any remaining caution. Within hours, he gathered loyal soldiers and began tracking Seraphine's movements. This time, there would be no hesitation. No emotional distance. No mistakes. He intended to bring Flora home. The search lasted 2 days. Each hour felt unbearable. Each delay deepened his determination. Finally, a scout returned with confirmation. The fortress, the location, the guards, everything they needed. Adrian wasted no time. Night covered the cliffs when his forces arrived. The assault began immediately. Steel rang against steel. Torches illuminated stone walls. Chaos erupted throughout the fortress. Adrian fought at the front. Not as a duke. Not as a nobleman. As a man desperate to save the woman he loved. The defenders resisted fiercely. None succeeded in stopping him. One corridor, then another. Each step brought him closer to Flora. At last he reached the chamber where she was being held. The sight of her sent relief crashing through him. She was alive. Exhausted. Frightened. But alive. Adrian. Her voice nearly broke him. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. For a brief moment the battle disappeared. Nothing existed except the two of them. Then a shout echoed from behind. Seraphine emerged onto a balcony overlooking the chamber. Desperation replaced composure. Her plans were collapsing. Her allies were losing. Her ambitions were dying. If I cannot have the kingdom, she screamed, neither of you will have a future. An archer stepped forward. The bowstring tightened. Everything happened in a single instant. The arrow flew directly toward Flora. Adrian reacted without thought. Without hesitation. Without fear. He stepped in front of her. The arrow struck. Pain exploded through his body. Flora's scream echoed across the chamber. Adrian staggered. Then collapsed. No. She dropped beside him. Blood stained her hands as she desperately tried to stop the bleeding. Around them the battle continued. She barely noticed. Nothing mattered except Adrian. His eyes struggled to remain open. Fear unlike anything she had ever known seized her heart. You don't get to leave me. Tears streamed down her face. Do you hear me? Adrian managed a weak smile. The expression transformed him. Gone was the cold duke. Gone was the distant husband. Only the man who loved her remained. I hear you. Flora gripped his hand. I love you. The words emerged through sobs. I love you and I'm not losing you now. His fingers tightened around hers. Then soldiers captured Seraphine. The battle ended. The conspiracy finally collapsed. Weeks passed before Adrian fully regained consciousness. Recovery proved slow, painful, but he survived. Every morning Flora remained beside him. Every evening she refused to live. This time neither hid their feelings. Neither retreated behind silence. They faced every challenge together. Months later they returned to the coast. Instead of immediately resuming life in the capital, Adrian fulfilled a promise. Beside the sea he built a magnificent greenhouse. Glass walls reflected sunlight. Thousands of flowers filled the interior. Every variety Flora loved found a place there. The greenhouse became a symbol of everything they had rebuilt. Trust, honesty, love. The following spring they held a second wedding ceremony. Not because law required it, because their hearts wanted it. Friends gathered beneath flowering arches. Ocean waves rolled gently in the distance. When Flora walked toward him, Adrian's eyes never left her. The officiant asked the traditional question, "Do you take this woman as your wife?" A smile touched Adrian's lips. The same genuine smile Flora had once feared she would never see. I've loved her since the day we met. Happy tears filled her eyes. This time they were not tears of heartbreak. They were tears of healing. Years later laughter echoed through the greenhouse as a little girl ran between rows of blooming flowers. Flora watched from a nearby bench. Adrian stood beside her. His arm wrapped comfortably around her shoulders. The future stretched before them. Bright, certain, earned. Once they had been separated by silence. Now they understood each other completely. And for the first time in their lives, neither had to wonder whether they were loved. They already knew.